Hello and warm welcome to Addis Dialoge. I'm Sintayo Tamrat with this edition, and with this edition I'll try to focus on why Ethiopians see their mega dam as a project that defines their future, their country's future. Do stay with us. And my guest today is Mahlet Ayele. She will tell us more about herself later. Thank you so much, Mahlet Ayele, for joining Addis Dialoge.
Thank you for having me. I am Mahlet Ayele. I did Middle Eastern Studies. I did my master's in Middle Eastern Studies and recently in Research Masters in African Studies. Currently based in the Netherlands, and I'm an independent Pan-African researcher.
Ethiopians consider this dam as a project that defines the future of political and economic well-being of their country. What possible transformation can the GERD bring to Ethiopians?
I think that's a very good question to start with, and the best way to look at the possible transformation that the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will bring to the livelihoods of Ethiopia is to look at it from the point of view of the Millennium Development Goals, which are set in the beginning of this millennia, meaning in 2000. So if we look at them, there are like 8 major components, which is eradication of poverty and hunger, to increase education, gender equality, to reduce child mortality, and then to improve maternal health, and also to reduce these deadly diseases by then, which is like HIV/AIDS and malaria, and also to improve partnership in terms of development amongst regional cooperation. So why would I say that this is a good point of view to look at it from this point of view is then we look at what does GERD brings to the livelihoods of Ethiopia. When it starts to produce electricity, then there will be a major boost of economy in the country, which will bring an infrastructure in different parts of the region. A boost of economy means obviously reducing or improving the economy of the country. So ultimately eradicating poverty, and also bringing in infrastructure means it includes hospitals, which reduce child mortality, which improve maternal health. Also, infrastructure has to do with education. If we want to set up an education, we certainly need electricity. So it touches everywhere. And also in terms of gender equality, it will hugely take off the burden of our mothers, sisters, and daughters, which ultimately also empowers, women. And also in terms of partnership, as we have witnessed all along for the past decade, Ethiopia has been advocating for the equal share over the Nile, over the water of Nile, and that means it's enhancing partnership amongst the riparian states. Not only Ethiopia is looking at itself, the benefits that it brings to the country, but also the cooperation that brings for the region. So if I put it in a nutshell, I think GERD will be a kind of an all-in-one prescription to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. Yeah.
Okay. And currently the Sustainable Development Goals. We started that with
the 2000, but the current one, which is set with for 2030, they are more elaborated part of these 8 ones. I have looked, I have gone through them, like there are 17 of them, but it's not any different. This is why I chose to see it from the general point of view from the 8 one. It is just an elaborated part of this. It's no different, because obviously the wallet did not achieve these goals in 2015. Maybe the new components that are added for 2030 in terms of justice and human rights. So I think Ethiopia can have also a big voice in that, because so far the downstream countries have been so unjust and irrational in terms of, approaching the equal share of the Nile water. So I think it's all included.
And currently 65 million Ethiopians do not have access to electricity, as the government sources report. And this is not an issue in Egypt, particularly when it comes to access to electricity. 100% of Egyptians have got that access. Can you just make some comparison?
I did a research on this, and Egypt all alone has been wrong about its accusation. First of all, it has zero contribution to this water. But whereas Ethiopia has 86% of contributes, it's 86% of the water, but in terms of use, it has a zero use. In terms of consistency, if you see, Egypt has been consistently inconsistent in terms of when it comes to the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. First, they were totally against the construction of the dam, but when in 2011, when it was on the ground already and they cannot do anything, then they started to advocate the filling has to be this, more of in the technical terms. And then now when Ethiopia chose to stick to the tripartite agreements that was made in 2015 with the DOP, the Declaration of Principles, then again they breached in 2019 in October, I believe, by going to the US, and then after that the UNSC, to the EU, whatnot, everywhere. And then in terms of, if you look at it, its impact, environmental impact, if we compare the Aswan High Dam and then the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the Aswan High Dam has a negative environmental impact. When they build Aswan, first of all, Aswan High Dam it's more of a revolutionary dam rather than a hydroelectric power, a hydroelectric generating dam. This has been proved by their own researchers, by historians, that when it was built, the colonial powers have told Egypt, Britain namely, that you will benefit more if this dam is built in the highlands of Ethiopia, because there we will be able to reserve more water, because in Egypt, in the Aswan High Dam, it's very warm, and 15% of the water is lost to evaporation. And then next to it, it's when they built it, they have displaced hundreds of thousands of Nubians from that place with only 36 pound compensation per family. And whereas there was also in terms of archaeology, it has a negative impact. They relocated a number of temples to other places, which actually they paid millions of dollars. But whereas when it comes to those Nubians who became refugees in their own country, has been compensated nothing compared to the temples. But if the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, in terms of all these problems, it has actually very less. It's an eco-friendly and it's sustainable. The other thing that we can compare is also Egypt has been, a number of times telling Ethiopia and warning Ethiopia, mongering war, beating the drums of war on Ethiopia. All presidents, if you go back and happen to read their speech, all presidents after they became independent, there is no single president that has not threatened Ethiopia. I have all the the quotations from their leaders. In fact, this is how they solve their internal divisions, by bringing, this issue. But Ethiopia, not a single leader of Ethiopia has reacted in the same way that Egypt did. While Cairo is telling Addis Ababa not to touch Nile, and if so, then there will be a bloodshed. But then I think it is their second president, Sadat, after the war in 1978, he went to the northern part of Israel, namely Haifa, and he did say in his speech, actually, we also bring you the Nile water right in front of your door. Israel, without asking it, by the way. And that was, while, and not to forget, by the way, Egypt is only the recipient of the Nile water. It has a zero contribution for this water.
The major concern of Egypt and Sudan is about water security. They are just all saying this is a big trade in relation with the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam project. However, several Egyptians and their politicians as well as activists say that it is never their major concern, meaning water trade is not their major concern, they say, because they do have just lots of projects. They do have underground water reservoir that may last for 1,000 years, and also they have not used desalination and effective water management in their irrigation schemes.
What it is Egypt has been playing, also lately Sudan has been playing like it's a victim in this process of building a dam, and by that they have been able to bring the center of the international community's attention, to get the sympathy of this international community as if they are the victim. But whereas this is completely by saying, 90% of their water is, they are dependent on the Nile water, which is true because they use Nile and they don't want to touch their other alternatives, which is aquifer groundwater and then the Mediterranean Sea. So yes, they do have alternatives, which is the groundwater, which can take them thousands of years. This is how actually Libya survived. They were totally supplying themselves from the groundwater, and they can do the same and produce what they are producing in terms of agriculture, for drinking, or for anything using their groundwater. And also in terms of desalination, they can use, Egypt is like naturally gifted because it's a very warm place, and they can desalinate it with a very low cost because they are right under the sun belt. And this is actually proved by their own researchers. This is why I think actually recently where they turned their head at last is to China, and this is what China told them. Actually, we can help you in terms of desalination and in your process of using your other alternatives. So what Egypt is doing is playing the victim.
So the interest is not water trade or water security trade?
No, not at all. The Lake Nasser, that was the Lake Nasser, which is a man-made, one of the largest lake in Africa or in the world, maybe in Africa, it can take them 3 or 4 seasons. This is researched by, this is according to researchers, 3 or 4 seasons if there's no drop of rain. So yeah, they do have a huge reservoir, and it's not a...
Negotiation is about give and take. And in this regard, Ethiopia has come a long distance. For example, the Ethiopian government recently announced that more water will be released from the average flow of the river to downstream countries when there is severe drought. And there are also some other measures, like just making all the information regarding the project available to both downstream countries. But Egypt and Sudan have always come up with new agendas, thwarting negotiations. What's your observation on the tripartite negotiation in this regard?
In my opinion, yes, Ethiopia has been generous throughout this decade-long negotiation. I do believe in principle Ethiopia has the right, it's a sovereign country, and has the right to develop itself using its own share of water that originates in its own territory, with, of course, not at the expense of others, without any significant harm to others. Ethiopia has been consistent throughout this. If you look at it, Ethiopia said, we're going to build the dam. Like this is 10 or 12 years ago. Egypt was against it, and then in 2011 it was realized, and then Egypt continued to be against it and to bring different terms in terms of the way it is released. We need more water when it is drought, this and that, and you have to fill in terms of you have to fill in 10 years or 12 years, not according to your plan. Ethiopia has tried that diplomatic journey to get a win through diplomacy rather than acting like the other part, meaning Egypt or Sudan. There's always an opportunity in all challenges. But I think at the end of this tunnel, Ethiopia's win through diplomacy will be a massive one, not only for the country, but also for all the 11 riparian states, ultimately for the continent, and for any country that will face the same situation like Ethiopia.
Downstream countries have proposed the involvement of the EU, the United Nations, and the US with the EU-led negotiation. Why are they undermining the African Union?
There are three cards that Egypt is always playing. There's a pan-Arabism, there's a nationalism, and there is the religion Islam. And Africa is all out of this. It is the last, historically, Africa is the last resource for Egypt to turn to. That's a historical fact for Egypt. Now, yes, they do have an agreement in 2015 with that DOP, which clearly stipulates that any issue between these three tripartite countries should be resolved within them without any fourth party involvement. And as we have seen, this was breached in 2019 by Egypt when they turned to the US. Ethiopia innocently accepted that, and US has led the negotiation. Actually, there were observers from October to February until Ethiopia walked out of that negotiation when they see the final resolution, which only serves the interest of Egypt. Now, Egypt still persisted for the involvement of the fourth party. And what Ethiopia did was actually the right decision. Okay, if we have to, then it should be only the African Union. That's when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed turned to the then chairman of the African Union, President Ramaphosa of South Africa. Before that, actually, he did ask, Prime Minister Abiy did ask Rwanda, and Egypt, Rwanda and Uganda, but Egypt refused it. So then finally, by the African Union, it was accepted by all the three parties. But then, as it is witnessed, they, in the middle of it, they take it to the United Nations Security Council, they take it to the European Union, they invite, while it is still AU-led, to invite others to be part of it. Ethiopia did the right decision because this is who Ethiopia, it shows that historical fact of both countries. Ethiopia has always been hanging and relying on the African Union, on the value of Pan-Africanism, as opposed to Egypt. So and the other reason actually for the question why they are demeaning the AU-led negotiation is because, they know that they are upholding to the colonial era agreement, which is unacceptable by any, African countries who have experienced, being colonized by those colonial powers. They know it is wrong, and they are afraid perhaps the result of it might favor Ethiopia, which is actually the right thing, but in their eyes that might favor Ethiopia because they are still holding their colonial. Africa for Egypt, it has been always the last source. Their politics it's either nationalism or Islam or Pan-Arabism.
Thank you, Mahlet Ayele, for sharing your views to Addis Dialogue. Dear Addis Dialogue viewers, this is a conversation with Mahlet Ayele, who is from Netherlands. She has just shared us a lot of experiences and views regarding the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Thank you for staying with us.